A cold wind whispered through the sprawling estate as the moon cast long, silver shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. The mansion stood like a fortress, its tall windows gleaming, hinting at the untold wealth housed within. Inside, the sound of muffled laughter echoed from a lavish dinner party, where the city's elite gathered, oblivious to the danger lurking just beyond the gates. Outside, in the cover of darkness, a van idled on a quiet street. Its engine purred softly, almost blending with the rustling leaves. Inside the vehicle, 5 men huddled together, their faces shadowed but their intentions clear. They were not here by chance. They had been watching, planning, waiting for the perfect moment. The leader, a wiry man with piercing green eyes and a cruel smirk, adjusted the black gloves on his hands. He nodded toward the estate, his voice low and cold. "Tonight's the night, boys. Quick in, quick out. Remember the plan, no mistakes." The others nodded, their nervous energy palpable. This wasn't just any heist. The target was Nathaniel Pierce, a reclusive millionaire known for his vast art collection, rare jewels, and a vault rumored to hold treasures worth millions. To them, he was an easy mark, rich, aging, and out of touch. What they didn't know was that someone else was watching them. Someone far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. A few houses down, in the shadows of an old oak tree, a man leaned against the trunk, his sharp eyes fixed on the van. His name was Malcolm Kane, a retired Special Forces operative who had seen his share of combat, betrayal, and survival. After leaving the military, Malcolm had chosen a quiet life in this affluent neighborhood, far removed from the chaos of his past. But old habits died hard, and his instincts were as sharp as ever. Tonight, something felt off. He had noticed the van earlier, parked for too long, its windows tinted too dark. The men inside didn't look like locals. Malcolm adjusted his jacket, feeling the familiar weight of the concealed knife tucked in his boot and the small flashlight clipped to his pocket. He wasn't the type to interfere without cause, but something told him this was no ordinary night. His gaze hardened as he saw the van doors slide open, and 5 figures emerged, dressed in black from head to toe. They moved with a purpose, their faces hidden behind masks, their movements rehearsed and precise. "They're professionals," Malcolm muttered under his breath, his jaw tightening. But even professionals made mistakes, and Malcolm had spent a lifetime exploiting them. The men approached the estate, cutting the power to the security cameras with ease. Within moments, the once brightly lit mansion fell into darkness. Inside, the partygoers murmured in confusion, some pulling out their phones to light their way. The leader of the gang gestured for his team to move. They scaled the high fence, landing silently on the other side like shadows come to life. Malcolm watched their every move, his mind racing. He could call the police, but he knew they'd take too long. By the time they arrived, these men would be gone, leaving chaos and fear in their wake. No, Malcolm thought, this was something he had to handle himself. He stepped away from the tree, his boots crunching softly against the gravel path as he followed them at a distance, his every step deliberate and measured. The gang had no idea they were being watched. Their leader directed them to a side entrance, where they picked the lock with practiced efficiency. Inside, the mansion was a maze of opulence, gold-framed paintings, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers. The men split up, each heading to a predetermined location, their bags ready to be filled with whatever valuables they could find. But Malcolm wasn't far behind. He slipped into the shadows, his military training kicking in. He moved like a ghost, silent and unseen, his eyes scanning the scene for any sign of trouble. He didn't know what these men were after, but he knew one thing for sure: they weren't leaving without a fight. In the main hall, the leader of the gang barked orders through a small earpiece. "You've got 5 minutes. Grab everything and meet back here." The men moved quickly, stuffing priceless artifacts and jewelry into their bags. One of them, a tall, burly figure, wandered into a dimly lit study, his flashlight sweeping across the room. As he reached for a gold-plated clock, he froze, sensing something, or someone, behind him. Malcolm stood in the doorway, his face calm but his eyes cold. "You picked the wrong house," he said, his voice low and steady. The man turned, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his side. But Malcolm was faster. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance between them, disarming him with a swift, practiced move. The gun clattered to the floor as Malcolm grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him against the wall, his voice a harsh whisper. "Tell your friends to leave, now." But it was too late for that. The commotion had drawn the attention of the others, who came running, their weapons drawn. Malcolm released the man and stepped back, his hands raised as if in surrender. But there was a glint in his eye, a spark of defiance that none of them noticed until it was too late. The gang leader stepped forward, his gun trained on Malcolm. "Who the hell are you?" Malcolm smirked, his stance relaxed but ready. "Just a neighbor. Thought I'd stop by to see what all the fuss was about." The room grew tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Malcolm knew he was outnumbered, but he had faced worse odds before. His mind worked quickly, analyzing their positions, their weapons, their weaknesses. He had one chance to turn the tide, and he wasn't about to waste it. As the seconds ticked by, the gang grew restless, their confidence wavering in the face of Malcolm's calm demeanor. The leader narrowed his eyes, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could act, a loud crash echoed through the mansion, followed by shouts from the partygoers who had finally realized something was wrong. Chaos erupted, and Malcolm saw his opening. With a swift, calculated move, he lunged forward, disarming the leader and taking control of the situation. The gang scattered, their plan unraveling as quickly as it had come together. But Malcolm wasn't done, not by a long shot. As he pursued them through the darkened mansion, his military training guiding his every move, one thing became clear: this wasn't just about stopping a robbery. It was about sending a message to anyone who thought they could take what wasn't theirs, especially in his neighborhood. And as the night wore on, Malcolm Kane proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one man could make all the difference. Malcolm moved through the mansion like a shadow, his senses on high alert. The gang was scattered now, their plan unraveling under the weight of their own panic and his calculated interference. But Malcolm wasn't about to let them regroup. He knew men like this: overconfident, dangerous, but sloppy under pressure. Their lack of discipline would be their downfall. As he crept down a hallway lined with ornate portraits, Malcolm's mind drifted for a moment, pulling him back to the years he'd spent in service. He could still hear the rhythmic crunch of boots on sand, the crackle of static in his earpiece, the adrenaline surging through his veins during missions that left no room for mistakes. The military had taught him discipline, precision, and the ability to assess any situation in seconds. Those instincts had saved his life more times than he could count. And now, in a place far removed from the battlefields he once knew, they were saving him again. But this wasn't a mission. These weren't trained soldiers. They were criminals who thought they could outsmart everyone. Malcolm almost felt sorry for them. Almost. He paused near a corner, his ears straining to catch the faintest sound. The distant shuffle of footsteps reached him. A single pair, moving cautiously but with purpose. He could tell it wasn't one of the guests from the party. They had fled to safety, barricading themselves in the larger rooms, terrified but unharmed. No, this was one of the gang members, trying to find his way out of the maze-like mansion. Malcolm's lips curled into a grim smile. They had underestimated the house, just as they had underestimated him. The footsteps grew louder. Malcolm pressed himself against the wall, waiting. The man came into view, his flashlight bobbing with every step. He was younger than Malcolm had expected, probably no older than 25. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the flashlight, his other hand clutching a crowbar. Malcolm's gaze hardened. This one was inexperienced and over his head, but that didn't make him any less dangerous. Looking for something, Malcolm's voice cut through the silence like a blade. The young man froze, his flashlight whipping around to illuminate Malcolm's face. Panic flared in his eyes, and he raised the crowbar defensively. "Stay back, man. I don't want any trouble." "Trouble's already here," Malcolm replied calmly, his tone as steady as his heartbeat. "Drop the crowbar and walk away. You don't want to be part of this." The young man hesitated, his grip tightening on the metal bar. "I can't. I have to." "Do what?" "Steal a few trinkets. End up in jail, or worse. Malcolm took a step closer, his voice firm, but not unkind. "You're in over your head, kid. Walk away while you still can." For a moment, it looked like the man might listen. His shoulders sagged slightly, and his grip loosened. But then, from somewhere deeper in the house, the gang leader's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Get back here. Don't let anyone stop you." The young man's resolve hardened instantly, fear giving way to desperation. He swung the crowbar wildly, aiming for Malcolm's head. But Malcolm was ready. He ducked under the swing and grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it just enough to make him drop the weapon. The crowbar clattered to the floor, and Malcolm shoved the man back, sending him sprawling. "Stay down," Malcolm warned, his voice low and dangerous. The young man scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with fear. But instead of fighting back, he turned and bolted, disappearing down the hallway. Malcolm let him go. He wasn't here to hurt anyone unless he had to. The real threat was the leader and the others still roaming the mansion. Malcolm bent down and picked up the crowbar, weighing it in his hand. It wasn't his weapon of choice, but it would do. He moved on, his steps quick and silent, the echoes of his past guiding him. As he navigated the dimly lit corridors, he began to piece together the bigger picture. This wasn't just a random robbery. The gang knew exactly what they were looking for. Their movements were too deliberate, their plan too coordinated. They had inside information. Someone had told them about the layout of the house, the location of the valuables, and even how to bypass the security system. But who and why? Malcolm's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of voices. He followed them, careful to stay out of sight. The gang had regrouped in what appeared to be a private gallery. The room was filled with priceless artwork and glass cases displaying rare artifacts. The leader stood at the center, barking orders, his frustration evident. "Where's Marcus? And why hasn't anyone grabbed the safe yet? We don't leave until we get what we came for." One of the men, a stocky figure with a nervous edge to his voice, spoke up. "We're running out of time, boss. The cops are probably on their way." "Then move faster," the leader snapped, his green eyes blazing. "We didn't come all this way to leave empty-handed." Malcolm watched from the shadows, his mind working quickly. He counted 4 men, all armed and on edge. They were growing desperate, which made them more dangerous. But they were also making mistakes, arguing, splitting up, losing focus. It was only a matter of time before they unraveled completely. He stepped back, retreating to a safer distance. He needed to keep them occupied long enough for the police to arrive, but he couldn't risk them turning violent if they felt cornered. He had to outthink them, outmaneuver them, and make them believe they were up against more than just one man. Malcolm's eyes landed on a small panel near the door, a fire alarm. A plan began to form in his mind. It was risky, but it might be just the distraction he needed to gain the upper hand. He reached for the lever, hesitating for only a second before pulling it. The alarm blared to life, a deafening wail that echoed through the mansion. Red strobe lights flashed, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The gang members froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. "What the hell?" one of them shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. "Stay calm," the leader barked, though his own composure was starting to crack. "It's just an alarm. Ignore it and keep moving." But they couldn't ignore it. The sound was disorienting, the flashing lights making it impossible to focus. And that was exactly what Malcolm had hoped for. As the chaos unfolded, Malcolm moved swiftly, using the distraction to his advantage. He disabled one of the men before the others even realized what was happening, striking with precision and retreating before they could react. The gang leader's shouts grew more frantic, his confidence crumbling under the weight of the unexpected resistance. He had planned for security guards, maybe even police. But this was something else entirely. Malcolm's voice rang out from the shadows, calm and unyielding. "You should have stayed home tonight. Now you're out of options." The gang leader turned, his gun raised, but he saw nothing but darkness. The others huddled together, their fear palpable. They had come here expecting an easy score, but now they were trapped, hunted by someone who knew the mansion better than they did, and who wasn't afraid to fight back. As the tension reached its breaking point, Malcolm moved again, his every step bringing him closer to ending the night on his terms. The mansion was alive with noise, the piercing blare of the fire alarm and the frantic shouts of the gang echoing off the high ceilings. The flashing red lights cast strange shadows, making the space feel otherworldly, like something out of a nightmare. Malcolm moved through it all with a steady calm, his mind focused on the task at hand. He wasn't just trying to stop these men. He was trying to understand them, to piece together their motives and the deeper game at play. The gang leader, his jaw clenched in frustration, gestured for his men to regroup. They stumbled into the grand foyer, their nerves fraying with every passing second. The leader's sharp voice cut through the chaos. "Stick together, he's just one guy, we can take him." One of the men, the stocky figure Malcolm had seen earlier, looked less convinced. "This wasn't part of the plan, man. He's picking us off one by one. What if he's not alone?" The leader grabbed him by the collar, his green eyes blazing with fury. "He is alone. And if you don't pull yourself together, we're all going down. Do your job." Malcolm watched from a hidden alcove, his expression unreadable. He could see the cracks forming in their unity, the doubt creeping in. It wouldn't take much to push them over the edge. But even as he observed their unraveling, questions gnawed at the back of his mind. Who was the leader? What was driving him? This wasn't just about money. There was a determination in his voice, a personal edge to his frustration. This was bigger than a simple heist. As the gang huddled, Malcolm's gaze shifted to the grand staircase at the far end of the foyer. It led to the second floor, where he knew Nathaniel Pierce kept his private study. If the gang had an ultimate goal, it was likely there. The thought spurred him into motion. He needed to get to the study before they did, to secure whatever it was they were after. But he couldn't let them see him, not yet. Malcolm slipped through a side passage, his movements swift and silent. The passage led to the kitchen, where the scent of expensive wine and roasted meat still lingered from the party. The place was eerily empty now, the staff and guests having fled in the initial chaos. He grabbed a heavy iron pan from the countertop, its weight reassuring in his hand. It wasn't much, but it would serve as a weapon if needed. As he moved toward the back staircase, a faint noise stopped him in his tracks. It was a muffled whimper, barely audible over the alarm. Malcolm froze, his ears straining. The sound came again, this time clearer, a child's voice, trembling with fear. He followed the noise to a pantry door, his heart sinking as he approached. Slowly, he opened it, revealing a young girl no older than 10, her knees hugged to her chest and her face streaked with tears. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered. Malcolm crouched down, his voice soft and reassuring. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. What's your name?" The girl hesitated, her lips trembling. "Emma." "Hi, Emma. My name's Malcolm. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, wiping her face with the sleeve of her dress. "I got scared when the lights went out, and I couldn't find my mom." Malcolm's chest tightened. He could only imagine how terrifying the night must have been for her. He extended a hand. "Come with me. I'll get you somewhere safe." Emma hesitated for a moment, then placed her small hand in his. Malcolm led her back through the kitchen, his mind racing. The gang didn't seem to know about her, but it was only a matter of time before they started searching the house more thoroughly. He needed to get her out of harm's way, and fast. He found a narrow servant staircase that led to the basement. It was a calculated risk, but he knew the area was secluded and unlikely to draw attention. He guided Emma down the steps, his eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The basement was dark and cluttered with old furniture and storage boxes, but it would do. "Stay here," Malcolm said, crouching to meet her gaze. "Don't make a sound, no matter what. I'll come back for you, okay?" Emma nodded, her small fingers clutching his sleeve. "You promise?" "I promise." His voice was firm, and he meant it. As he turned to leave, a wave of anger surged through him. This wasn't just about valuables or revenge anymore. These men had brought terror into a home filled with innocent people, and they were going to pay for it. Upstairs, the gang had split up again, their leader growing increasingly desperate. Malcolm shadowed them from the edges, watching and waiting. He needed more information, something that would give him an edge. He trailed one of the men, a wiry figure with a scar running down his cheek, as he rifled through a cabinet in the study. "What are you looking for?" Malcolm's voice sliced through the silence like a knife. The man whipped around, his face pale. "Stay back." Malcolm didn't move. His gaze was steady, unyielding. "Whatever it is, it's not worth your life. Walk away." But the man didn't listen. He lunged at Malcolm, a knife glinting in his hand. Malcolm sidestepped the attack, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until the knife fell to the floor. With a swift strike to the back of the man's head, Malcolm rendered him unconscious. He searched the man's pockets, finding a crumpled piece of paper. Unfolding it, he saw a hand-drawn map of the mansion with several areas circled: the gallery, the study, and a section labeled vault. The leader wasn't just guessing. He knew exactly where to look. But how? Malcolm's thoughts were interrupted by a distant crash, followed by angry shouting. The gang was closing in on the study. He tucked the map into his pocket and slipped out the door, his mind racing. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed to end this before anyone else got hurt. As he moved toward the grand staircase, he heard the leader's voice, low and venomous. "We don't leave until we find it. You understand? That safe has what we need." "What's in it?" one of the men asked, his voice hesitant. "Enough to change everything," the leader replied. "Now move." Malcolm's jaw tightened. Whatever was in that safe, it was the key to understanding why this was happening. But he couldn't let them take it. Not while he still had the strength to fight. Malcolm moved swiftly through the maze-like mansion, his heart pounding but his focus razor-sharp. Every sound, every flicker of movement became a potential threat or clue. He knew time was running out, not just for him, but for Emma, the terrified girl hiding in the basement, and for Nathaniel Pierce's legacy, whatever it was that lay locked in that mysterious safe. The gang's desperation was a dangerous fuel, driving them to take risks, and Malcolm understood all too well how cornered animals reacted. He heard voices coming from the study, closer this time. The gang leader's frustration was boiling over, his commands turning into barks of anger. Malcolm edged closer, using the shadows to conceal his movements. From his vantage point, he could see the leader hunched over a desk, yanking at the drawers, while the others rifled through the room in a frenzy. "It's not here," one of them shouted, slamming a drawer shut. "It's in the vault," the leader snapped, his tone venomous. "I told you. He keeps everything important in there. What if we can't get to it? The old man probably has it booby-trapped or something." The leader's jaw tightened, and he slammed his fist onto the desk. "We're getting in. I don't care what it takes. If we don't, this whole night's been for nothing." Malcolm studied the scene, his mind working through the options. The leader wasn't just angry. He was invested, like whatever was in that safe meant more to him than money or power. Malcolm needed to understand why, but there wasn't time to dwell on it now. He had to act before they made it to the vault. He slipped away from the study, heading toward the west wing where the vault was hidden. It was a part of the house he hadn't explored yet. But the map he'd taken off the unconscious gang member showed a clear path. Malcolm moved with purpose, his every step calculated. He needed to stay ahead of them, to set the stage for what was coming. The west wing was eerily quiet, the sound of the fire alarm fading as he moved deeper into the mansion. The air here felt heavier, the weight of secrets pressing down on him. He found the vault at the end of a narrow hallway, its heavy steel door standing out against the ornate wood paneling. The door had no visible keypad or lock, just a sleek panel that looked almost futuristic. Malcolm examined it closely, his military training kicking in. It wasn't a standard safe. It was custom, designed to be impenetrable without the right code or biometric access. Breaking into it would take time and expertise, both of which the gang didn't seem to have. That gave him a small advantage, but he knew it wouldn't last long. They were resourceful, and desperation had a way of making people reckless. As he backed away from the vault, he heard footsteps approaching. They were quick and purposeful, the heavy thud of boots on hardwood echoing down the hall. Malcolm pressed himself against the wall, his breath steady as he waited. The first man came into view. a tall, wiry figure holding a flashlight and a gun. Malcolm moved silently, stepping behind him and delivering a swift blow to the back of his head. The man crumpled to the floor without a sound. But the noise of the body hitting the ground was enough to alert the others. Shouts erupted from the hallway, and Malcolm knew his cover was blown. He ducked into a side room, his mind racing. He had bought himself a few moments, but it wouldn't be long before they found him. Spread out. The leader's voice rang out. He's close. Don't let him get away this time. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Malcolm knew they were closing in. He moved quickly, slipping through the adjoining rooms, his eyes scanning for anything he could use. He found himself in a library, the walls lined with shelves of old books and leather-bound volumes. A heavy globe sat on a stand near the center of the room, its brass fittings gleaming in the dim light. Malcolm grabbed the globe, its weight solid in his hands, and positioned himself near the door. His breathing slowed as he listened to the approaching footsteps. One of the gang members stepped into the room, his gun drawn, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Malcolm waited until the man was close, then swung the globe with all his strength. It connected with a sickening thud, and the man went down hard. The commotion drew the others. Malcolm didn't wait for them to reach him. He slipped out through another door, his movements quick and deliberate. He was leading them, drawing them away from the vault and deeper into the mansion. It was a dangerous game, but one he knew he could win if he stayed one step ahead. As he moved, he began to piece together what little he knew. The leader's obsession with the safe wasn't random. This was personal, a vendetta against Nathaniel Pierce or something he represented. Malcolm's gut told him there was more to the story, but he couldn't focus on that now. His priority was to neutralize the gang and protect the people still in the house. He reached the grand ballroom, its once beautiful decor now marred by the chaos of the night. The shattered remains of a chandelier littered the floor, and the faint smell of smoke lingered in the air. Malcolm positioned himself behind a pillar, his eyes scanning the room. He could hear them coming, their voices tense and angry. "He's toying with us," one of them shouted. "I don't care what it takes," the leader growled. "We're ending this now." Malcolm's grip tightened on the crowbar he picked up earlier. He was ready. The game was nearing its climax, and every instinct told him the storm was about to break. The leader stormed into the grand ballroom, his green eyes blazing with determination, flanked by two of his remaining men. Their footsteps crunched over broken glass as their flashlights swept across the vast space. Malcolm, hidden behind one of the massive marble pillars, watched them carefully. His mind raced through possible moves, but something about the leader's demeanor gave him pause. This wasn't just frustration or desperation anymore. This was personal. "Enough of this cat and mouse nonsense," the leader barked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You think you're clever, hiding in the shadows, but you're only delaying the inevitable. Come out and face me." Malcolm didn't flinch. He stayed perfectly still, his breathing even as he assessed the situation. The gang leader's tone was different now, more charged. It wasn't just anger, it was a challenge. And in that challenge, Malcolm detected something he hadn't fully considered. The man knew who he was. This wasn't random. The leader wasn't shouting into the void. He was talking directly to Malcolm. The realization hit like a punch to the gut, but Malcolm didn't have time to process it. One of the henchmen moved closer to his hiding spot, his flashlight beam cutting dangerously close. Malcolm tightened his grip on the crowbar and prepared to act, but before he could, the henchman stopped abruptly. "Boss," the man said, his voice tinged with unease. "What if he's not working alone? We haven't seen the old man. What if he's got backup?" The leader spun around, his expression sharp. "Pierce doesn't have the guts to fight back, and this guy, he's just a relic, a ghost trying to protect something that's already lost." Malcolm's eyes narrowed. The leader wasn't just guessing. He knew who Nathaniel Pierce was, and, by extension, he knew why the safe was so important. But how? Malcolm had spent his career dealing with dangerous people, but this was different. The leader's confidence wasn't just bravado. It was rooted in knowledge, in something deeply personal. As the men argued, Malcolm slipped from his hiding spot, moving quietly along the edge of the room. He needed to keep the upper hand to stay unpredictable. But just as he reached the far corner, the leader's voice rang out again, this time sharper, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Stop hiding, Malcolm." The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Malcolm froze, his body tensing as a wave of confusion and alarm washed over him. The leader's voice was calm now, almost taunting. "That's right," the leader continued, his flashlight sweeping the room. "I know who you are. I know what you've done. You think you're some kind of hero, some guardian angel swooping in to save the day. But you're not. You're just a man who's good at one thing, violence." Malcolm stepped into the light, his face expressionless, but his eyes sharp. "You know my name. That doesn't mean you know me." The leader smirked, lowering his flashlight slightly. "Oh, I know you, Malcolm King. Special Forces, decorated war hero, the man who disappeared after that little incident overseas. You think you're a mystery, but you're not. And tonight, you're in over your head." Malcolm's mind raced as he tried to piece it together. How did this man know so much about him? The missions he'd been on, the lives he'd lived, they were classified, buried under layers of secrecy. And yet, this stranger was throwing his past at him like a weapon. "Why are you here?" Malcolm demanded, his voice low and steady. "This isn't just about money. What do you want from Pierce?" The leader's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of something darker, pain, maybe, or resentment. "Nathaniel Pierce isn't the saint you think he is. He's a thief, a liar, and he's got blood on his hands. That safe doesn't hold money, Malcolm. It holds the truth, and I'm here to make sure the world sees it." Malcolm's jaw tightened. The leader's words rang with conviction, but they raised more questions than answers. What truth? What could be so damning that it warranted this level of risk and violence? Malcolm didn't trust the man, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that there was more to the story than he'd been told. Before Malcolm could respond, the sound of a distant crash shattered the moment. It came from the direction of the vault. The leader's head snapped toward the noise, his expression shifting to one of triumph. "That's my cue," he said, backing toward the door. "You can try to stop me, Malcolm, but you won't win. Not this time." With that, the leader turned and sprinted out of the room, his men following close behind. Malcolm hesitated for a fraction of a second, torn between chasing them and staying to protect the rest of the house. But then he remembered Emma, the terrified girl hiding in the basement, and his decision was made. He moved quickly, retracing his steps toward the vault. The noise he'd heard wasn't just the sound of something breaking. It was the sound of the stakes rising, the game shifting into its final act. Malcolm didn't know what awaited him, but he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Malcolm followed the echoes of footsteps down the dim corridor, his every sense on high alert. The air grew colder as he neared the vault, the silence broken only by the distant murmur of voices. He moved swiftly, knowing the leader and his crew were moments away from uncovering whatever secrets the safe held. The thought of Emma crossed his mind, her fear-stricken face giving him a renewed sense of urgency. If this ended badly, she might be the one to pay the ultimate price. The vault door stood ajar when he arrived, its advanced locking mechanism bypassed in a way that made Malcolm's stomach tighten. These men weren't amateurs. They had resources and knowledge far beyond what he anticipated. Inside, the leader was hunched over a small desk, a bundle of papers spread out before him. His men hovered nearby, their faces a mix of awe and confusion. "This is it," the leader said, his voice low but charged with emotion. "The proof." Malcolm stepped into the room, his presence instantly drawing their attention. The henchmen raised their weapons, but the leader held up a hand, stopping them. "Let him see," the leader said, his eyes locked on Malcolm. "Let him understand why we're here." Malcolm moved cautiously closer, his gaze shifting between the men and the documents on the desk. What he saw stopped him cold. Photographs, handwritten letters, and financial records painted a damning picture of Nathaniel Pierce. Deals with corrupt officials, illegal arms trades, and a long trail of betrayals were laid bare. The man who had once been heralded as a philanthropist and business icon was nothing more than a manipulative puppeteer, pulling strings for personal gain. "This is why we came," the leader said, his voice heavy with bitterness. Pierce ruined lives, my family's included. He's not the hero you thought he was. Malcolm felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over him. He'd risked everything to protect Pierce and his legacy, only to discover that the man wasn't worth it. But even as the pieces began to fall into place, Malcolm couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The leader's vendetta was clear, but the lengths he'd gone to seemed too extreme, too dangerous for a simple act of revenge. "What's your plan?" Malcolm asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Expose him and then what? You think this will make it right?" The leader's expression darkened. "This isn't about making it right. It's about balance. Pierce took everything from my family. This is justice." Before Malcolm could respond, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the hallway. Both he and the leader turned as a group of armed security personnel stormed into the room. They weren't Pierce's men. Their gear was too advanced, their movements too precise. Malcolm recognized the telltale signs of a private paramilitary group, another layer of Pierce's hidden empire. The room erupted into chaos as the new arrivals opened fire. Malcolm dove behind the desk, dragging the leader with him as bullets tore through the air. The henchmen weren't as lucky, their bodies falling to the ground before they could react. Malcolm glanced at the leader, whose face was pale with shock. "You think Pierce didn't plan for this?" Malcolm growled. "He doesn't care about you or me. All he cares about is protecting his secrets." The leader nodded grimly, the weight of his choices finally sinking in. Together, they fought their way out of the vault, Malcolm's military expertise guiding them through the chaos. The gunfire echoed through the mansion as they navigated the labyrinth of hallways, their survival dependent on Malcolm's instincts. As they reached the main floor, Malcolm led them toward the basement where Emma was hiding. They burst into the small storage room, and Emma let out a gasp of relief when she saw him. But her relief quickly turned to fear when she noticed the blood on Malcolm's arm, a graze from one of the bullets. "I'm fine," Malcolm reassured her, his voice calm despite the urgency. "We need to get out of here." With Emma and Tal, they made their way to the back entrance, dodging the remaining security forces. When they finally reached the safety of the woods surrounding the estate, Malcolm allowed himself a moment to breathe, but the leader wasn't finished. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and determined. "Pierce might have won this battle, but the truth will come out. I'll make sure of it." Malcolm stared at him, torn between anger and understanding. He knew the man's pain, the drive to right a terrible wrong, but he also knew the cost of vengeance, the toll it took on a person's soul. "Sometimes the truth isn't enough," Malcolm said finally. "Sometimes the only way to win is to walk away." The leader looked at him, his expression unreadable, before turning and disappearing into the shadows. Malcolm watched him go, the weight of the night's events settling heavily on his shoulders. He turned to Emma, whose wide eyes reflected both fear and gratitude. "Let's get you home," he said softly. As they walked through the woods, Malcolm couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The secrets he'd uncovered, the lives that had been lost. It was a reminder that the world wasn't black and white. It was messy, complicated, and filled with shades of gray. And while he couldn't change the past, he could still fight for a better future, one small step at a time.